Welcome to Live. I know a guy bicycles hanging out with a guy. Today is this old bike series, but something a little special about this one. This is actually a repair, not necessarily the one I actually purchased to refurbish. So I did open up service, and very limited though. The reason being is my time is very kind of very touch and go all the time. So, between work, family, and everything else, and opportunities to go purchase bikes and so forth. So I've released service only to do the full tune-up that I provide on the bikes I do on my own. There's 3 levels to that, not to bore you with that part of it, but essentially it's specific to road bikes because I'm all tooled up to do road bikes. So I figured it actually opens up that to the community where I've sold people bikes locally that have bought road bikes from me that can do to continue to service through me as well, in addition to those who are maybe buying a used road bike and need to have it tuned up and fitted for them, because I do have a fit area. I can combine that with actually the service. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do to add added value to the local market to do tune-up. So this gentleman brought this bike in, and he bought it used. It's a Secteur Comp from Specialized. And it's a pretty decent bike. I mean, it's a aluminum frame with a carbon tail end, but I'm gonna just kind of run through and start breaking this down. And I figured this would be a great opportunity to do a live segment of it and just hanging out with me and let me jibber jabber what I'm looking at. And so essentially, when you take a bike to a bike shop, and this is, you probably experienced this. If you have, you'll see a person like me like doing a service riding, and you'll get a laundry list of things. And a lot of times you're standing there and you're like, oh, well, this tune-up, they do the wheels, adjust the hubs, adjust the trailers, brakes, bottom bracket and headset, and tubes and all that. Well, when you're standing there, you're kind of like, and it just gets glazed over. I mean, I'm kind of that way when I take my car in to get work done, because I'm not a car mechanic, but I pick on some of it, but I'm like, whatever. The best note I can give to you as an individual going to a bike shop is, hey, just figure out exactly what you're trying to get out of the tune-up. You don't need to know the details of the derailleur tension, the spoke tensions and the derailleur adjustments and all that, but you do need to bring in the issues or concerns that you have with that particular bike when you've been riding it. And that really helps out the best outcome of getting that tune-up. So if you're going for a ride, it's like, well, it makes a weird little tick noise here, or I'm constantly getting flats, or I'm not sure if this is right, or the cable's too tight, it binds up, or do my feet touch the pedals or the foot touches the tire, things like that. Have a list. I would say like 2 or 3 things that you want to bring to that mechanic or that bike shop that you're having your tune-up done to kind of address. Well, that does 2 things. First, you are conveying the expectation of what you're looking to get done. I mean, a tune-up is kind of like a blanket coverage, right? And as a tech, we'll do a lot more than you'll ever know or actually feel while you're riding, but some of it's prevention for bike parts to not wear out as fast. But as a mechanic, we love having these notes because we know specifically what the rider is looking to get fixed. And then we can really kind of focus on those things versus just a general tune-up. It's nothing worse than being a bike mechanic and work on a bike and they turn around and it's like, well, it's still making this noise. Like, well, I didn't know about the noise to begin with. And then you're kind of put on the spot of trying to fix it, and it's not a win-win. So the win-win is basically bring in that list of things. And when you do pick up the bike, take for a quick test ride in the parking lot. So it's like right there on the spot, like, oh, it's still doing this, or I have a question about that. That way you're not going home an hour later or whatever, then you have to go back to them and it's just a hassle. But anyway, I'm gonna kind of just do a general assessment on this particular bike as we're speaking, and then I'll start diving into it. So essentially when we're doing a service riding, we're trying to evaluate what parts need to be replaced. This guy has a flat tire, and I did notice there's some kind of cracking on it, so most likely the tire needs to be replaced. I did check the chain on this, and it is at a 0.25, which means it hasn't hit the 0.5 mark, which needs to be replaced. But since it's been a used bike, that could be a newer chain versus a cassette, and I'm not going to really know the wear on the cassette until I go test ride it and really grind each one of those gears. Because if the cassette is worn out in those particular gears, you'll get like a jump or a hop or a skip kind of thing. So that's going to be yet to be determined. I forewarned the customer of this, like, well, you never know. But I'm going to definitely address that. And when I do, I strip these down to the frame, kind of like an overhaul, and inspect the frame and so forth. Also on bar tape, think about bar tape on road bikes. Bar tapes is, you know, it's your grips, it's your comfort part. But if you need these cables to be replaced underneath, we need to unwrap this bar tape. Well, unwrapping this bar tape, sometimes it can, depending how old it is or what kind it is, it may tear. And if it tears, then we're going to need a new bar tape. So I forewarned the customer about that too. It's like, well, if it tears when I pull this back to replace the cable and housing, that's going to be a little added expense there. So, and I double checked the brake pads. They have plenty of meat on them, that kind of thing. The drivetrain seems pretty light, dry, so it doesn't seem like it's had very much lube on that. So, and it's kind of like, you know, I got dirt and so forth on that. So, anywho, but one thing that was a definite blatant stick out is the cable housing is starting to peel off its layering, and eventually these will break and spline out, and that compression spline cable in there holding the cable itself will break free. What happens there when that cable breaks or the housing breaks free like that, then all of a sudden that cable cannot be adjusted. There's just too much play within that housing. So these are going to have to be replaced. And looking at how short these are cut, I will definitely replace the cables and housing. Cables and housing is not that expensive. It's just the labor to do it because it's really labor intensive and adjustments and so forth. So if you're getting your, you know, tune-up done, you know, if it's not too much of a price lift difference between one package to another, because if you replace the shifters, cables, and housing, that will make, that's a good chance that your drivetrain or your shifting is going to be a lot smoother and more accurate while you're riding. So it sometimes almost brings it back to life to like new state. So anywho, and depending what kind of cables and housing you do, if you do some nice or upgraded ones, actually it might perform better than you ever did new. Yeah, that's something to think about. So did check this out, and the wheels seem to be true, but also another dead giveaway is on the back part here. We have this skewer, and the skewer does not match the front, and also it's, you know, steel on steel. This most likely and has been a trainer bike, so that's a dead giveaway. Not that I mean, this skewer will work for either or, but kind of gives you the concept of where this bike came from. And when this individual bought it used, most likely it was a trainer bike just sitting there. And as in trainer bikes go, they sometimes don't get used a lot. So if somebody's upgraded their bike to a newer version, or they're just going to get into it, you know, it's like buying exercise equipment. How many of us have bought exercise equipment and it sat in the basement and became a clothing drying rack, not exercised on at all? I mean, I have a Bowflex right now where there's clothes hanging on it. Shame on me as well, but that's one of those things, you know. Trainer bikes can go, it can be done the same way or have the same outcome kind of thing. So this guy had a flat. So I'm taking off the grommet so I can get the stem, press the valve out. These little grommets, they're not technically necessary. They just hold the tube in place for easier for the pump to get on there. So I will double check that because I like to double check, see where that hole is in relation, because sometimes this rim strip can be compromised and there's a gap in the double wall rim. If that strip is scooted over or compromised, when you put a new tube in there, it can sneak inside that spoke cavity where the spoke hole is supposed to go through, and it'll cut the tube. Because you're talking about 110, 120 PSI per square inch. So that means there's a lot of pressure for that tube. And if this has been compromised, it'll definitely push it through and pop that tube. And remove the freewheel or cassette, not a freewheel, cassette. Freewheel is a total different beast, which we don't see very many of those anymore. So I got my chain whip and chain ring remover. Oh, I have to get some leverage put on the ground to get that out. Woo. And there it goes. So I'm going to pre-stage this stuff here. Get that ready to go. So, and I will wash these rims in the tank, and then once I true them up, I polish them with Armor All, and I double check all the spokes, the spoke nipples, eyelets, and all that as well. But first off, it looks pretty good. I mean, it feels pretty good, so it doesn't seem like to be any too much issue there. Take off the front. So you can see the skewer on this one. This is the skewer, which is a little different than the rear. The back one is missing a spring. Okay, these little springs on these guys, they're not technically needed. Like, you don't have to have them on there. What the spring is doing is keeping these skewer equalized outwards, so when you're putting it on and off, it's a little bit easier to put it in the dropouts and out of the dropouts. So if you're out in there in the dust trying to fix a flat and one of these little boogers bounce and boy, it disappears, you can still put it together without the spring and carry on with your ride. Every bike shop will have a tub of these, so you can always get an extra one. I'll put an extra one on the back here for this consumer use and ease. So I'm filling the hub, and that feels pretty smooth and secure, so that's a good sign. And looking at the tire, I mean, there's some wear on it, but not too bad. And these are pretty decent rims from Mavic. It's a pretty workhorse rim, the CXP 22s. This is a stamped specialized hub, as well as I think the rear one is. It's just a hub company that makes a whole bunch of hubs with, you can brand them. They're decent. I mean, they're not bad in any case, but it's not a Shimano hub or a Mavic specific hub. So keep that in mind. If you see the rim and the hub is a different brand, it's still okay. It's just not complete Mavic wheel per se. So we're gonna look at this chain, see if it's a one with a power link. Yep, right there. Power link, quick link, there's several different brands, different names to them, but they use this particular tool. It's like a pair of pliers that pushes that chain link together and makes it easier to take off and put back on. And I put the little bits in a little strainer here so I don't lose them in my Sonic cleaner that's behind me. Like so. And when they say like there's a dry chain, this is a good example of a dry chain. It's like you run your finger down and there's nothing that's coming off of it as any kind of lube. This will make a lot of noise while it's riding. So, and also it's metal on metal, so you want to have a lubricant barrier between your chain and also your cassette, derailleurs, and chain rings, because it just prevents wear and tear essentially, lengthens the life of them. So. Anywho, got those going on. So, since I know I'm putting new cables on it, I'm gonna be popping the cables. Cut those guys. Like so. And this doesn't have internal routing, so I don't have to really look at that. Ooh, okay. I don't know if you can really see this, but this has a buildup of rust and gunk. So something's going on underneath that. Got a lot of contaminants underneath the bike, so it's really kind of want to check that guide underneath there and make sure it's clean. Well, I'll also clean those in the Sonic cleaner, but ultrasonic cleaner. But that means this cable's definitely been compromised. That kind of thing. Ugh. Crunchy. Now I will be putting the shifters in the ultrasonic cleaner as well on this guy. Yeah, this one has some contaminant exposure versus the shiny, then it gets to the dull. You probably can't really see that well, but just take my word for it. It's more rusty here and shiny here, whereas underneath the housing. That rust can kind of move underneath the housing, which can compromise your shifting and also your braking as well. So toss that. Get these cables out of the way. So I'm not tripping over them. And I do keep the housing just for measurement sake, so I can cross-reference it to make sure I'm cutting the right length of housing on that. Tools away before I dive into my next bit. So basically what I'm doing is what they call stripping the frame, which is quite obvious what it's called. So I'm stripping it down, getting all the parts ready to be thrown into the cleaner, and then clean the wheels, inspect the frame, and then once everything is clean and inspected, and then I relube all the parts after the sonic cleaner, because it definitely stripped any kind of grease that was in there, along with the dirt too. So that's a good thing. And I relube it with Triaflow Superior Lube. This is a lighter weight lube. It's really good for pivots and all those things. I don't use that for the chain. I use Rock and Road, this stuff for my chain lube. That actually works pretty well. It's a dryer lube, so it leaves a film on there, and it doesn't seem to collect a lot of gunk, so it seems to be a little bit better. And I do the brakes in the cleaner too, because you have, I mean, it's not a huge performance thing, but it is. I mean, all these pivots here, it's nice to have that cleaned out, and then I relube those pivot points and also clean the contaminants. And I sand the pads because I get the little metal shavings or whatever that may be in them, or dirt. So you have a clean contact surface on those pads hitting the rim. And here goes the front. And you can see this is, kind of gunky and dirty in itself, like so. So, as you've seen anything on my channel before, you've seen me do this, but obviously this is live and unedited, so it's going to carry on a little bit more. But if the concept behind this is hanging out in the shop with a mechanic. I mean, you go into a bike shop and you hear the guys and gals in the back, jibber jabbering while they're working on bikes and so forth. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to give an experience for somebody to kind of see what's going on and how the magic is happening and what we talk about. And a lot of times it's like music and movies and whatever, that kind of thing, whose birthday's coming up, that kind of deal. The reason why I'm taking this off is, first clean the cage, but I like to double check the braze-on bolts here for the bottle cages. That way I know they're, well, number one, functional and cleaned. And after they're cleaned, I put them back in with a light bearing grease. Well, it's a Teflon bearing grease, premium grease, what they call it, from Finish Line. That way, if they wanted to utilize these, they're not going to be stuck, and they're going to be easy to take out, and they're not going to end up getting cross-threaded in there or what have you. It's just one of those things where it's an added professional touch, and only takes a second to do it. Plus, if one of these were burgered up, I can re-tap it and clean it up and make it functional. Or, there you go with the best foot forward again. If they picked up this bike and decided to put on another bottle cage and it's stuck or what have you, it's going to be pretty hard to put on there, and then they're into another whole world of hurt if they do cross thread it, or these are pinned in there. So it's a little grommet that presses in from the inside, and if that breaks free from the frame, then you basically, it won't hold, so you have to cut these off very carefully without scratching the frame, and then you get the parts out and drop it out. I mean, it's kind of a mess. It can be done. Most bike shops, just show you the front derailleur here, how gunky it is. This will be cleaned up really well after the sonic cleaning, for sure. The ultrasonic cleaner, or having a drivetrain clean, I mean, I like the ultrasonic cleaner because it's super easy, and it's a nice newer version of instead of using those solvent tanks. Using those solvent tanks for just really hard on yourself, scrubbing. I do just a little bit of pre-prep and whatnot. Right now I'm scraping off the Teflon buildup on the jockey pulleys. Even the ultrasonic cleaner has a hard time getting that off. So if you scrape that off, that really helps. The cleaner, you don't have to leave it in there longer to get that, and you get some of the fuzz. And also I'm inspecting the jockey pulleys as I'm doing this too. These jockey pulleys, eventually they do wear out, or on the older ones they'll start cracking, which is kind of crazy, but these are just basically a Teflon, piece of plastic, and they do eventually dry out and crack sometimes versus being worn out. So that's something to look out for too. Not an expensive lift. I mean, those are pretty cheap to do. And I do take the pedals. Oop, that is not a 15 millimeter. That's an 8 millimeter probably, or skinnier. 6. So when you take pedals off, the direction to tighten them is to backwards, and the direction to loosen them and take them off is pedal forwards. That's the easiest way to think about it versus what's right threaded or left threaded. So pedaling backwards tightens, pedaling forwards loosens. That's the easiest way to think about it. Oh. So Specialized Secteur Comp, it's one of the lower end ones. I mean, not low, like bottom of the barrel low, but it is the lower end with aluminum with a carbon back, which is kind of nice. So most of these I've seen are actually all aluminum, so this has a nice little carbon feature back here. Most road bikes have carbon forks nowadays anyway. But it's a pretty decent bike. It's a great entry-level bike to get into riding. That's when Specialized was making lower price point bikes. Well, now today, I don't think they have the Spectre line anymore. And if it is, it's still pretty expensive. I think they were trying to bring out a $1,000 bike or $1,500 bike to start price point wise. There we go. Yeah, you don't want to strip these guys. You want to make sure that tool fits in there good. This has a lot of dirt contaminant underneath here. And I just did one of these through cranksets as a video. So if you want to check out one of those other videos that have a little more detail what I'm doing here, taking this thing off, I definitely have that available. Which is kind of the purpose of what I'm doing, is just, general videos on bikes and, what it's like in the bike shop. Also try to pinpoint some tech bits to, if you do come across this crankset, I'll have a video out there to know what to do to work on it. At least have a fighting chance. Because some of this older stuff, I mean, this is not like way old, but technology has changed quite a bit, so it might be hard to find an exact match video-wise. And I figured if I highlight some of this older stuff as I'm working on them, it'll definitely benefit somebody someday. Like it has me when looking for videos when I come across certain tech pieces. I'm like, how's this thing come apart again? And I've worked on a lot of stuff, but there's still some things that I want to say stump me, but kind of slow me down. And I just want to make sure I do it right, that kind of thing. So this is what that cable is running on underneath. If you're watching this earlier, you'll notice there was a lot of rust on that cable. This is on the bottom part, and this is where they're exposed. If there's rust on the cable, well, that definitely means the cables weren't stainless steel, which is fine because they make a cable that's galvanized, but that galvanized portion of it is worn off, and that's where it exposes the contaminants and causes it to rust. So that's what we got going on here. All right, oh yeah, so we're gonna do the shifters. So to do the shifters, I don't have to pull the tape off. If I find this housing is still fine, I'm not the type of person that's just gonna replace something just to replace it. The housing, if it's doesn't have any contaminants and so forth, looks still functional, I'll reuse the brake housing. Reason being is, brake housing it doesn't have to have that compression on there as long as it's smooth. And looking at the cable here, it's very clean. So most likely I can reuse this and save the time and also the money for the customer of replacing it. I'll replace the brake cables, but if the housing can be reused for brakes, definitely go for it. And that's part of that gel that they put underneath the tape. It gets kind of grody over time. It breaks down. Reminds me of those old implants that they had back in the 90s, and that was a mess. Anyway, not going to go there. Wrong channel for that. That's not what we're talking about today. So, yeah. So when I clean these, I like to spray the internals. I highly recommend using White Lightning. White Lightning is a good industry standard cleaner, but if you don't have access to White Lightning, carb cleaner works well. But you definitely want to be really careful with carb cleaner because it'll eat the paint off of things. So you want to be light and polite when it comes to this. And that's, you're shooting on the inside here, and the gearing to shoot out any of that old grease, because that old grease builds up over time and it gets hardened, and that prevents it from shifting well. So by breaking it down, throwing it in the Sonic cleaner, that really cleans out that shifting mechanism, and before you know it, it'll shift like new again. It's one of those tricks. Oh, dive into this here. Also, this live is kind of just one of the many of trials. I'll definitely improve upon these going forward. So thank you for hanging with me or watching us on the replay. I know it's a holiday weekend here in the States. It's Father's Day. I don't know if Father's Day carries over to other countries, but that is tomorrow. And Father's Day is kind of the kickoff of this, when the season is really heating up kind of things. Back to cleaning the inside of the other shifter. I aim for the gear. You can pry this open with your hand, expose those gears. Use that White Lightning or carb cleaner very lightly. Try not to get into your eyes. Protect your hands. So I always wear gloves. And that bad boy is ready to go. So, all right. So I got my parts pre-staged, ready to go into the Sonic cleaner. I will coat some of the gearing and so forth through the couple cycles to break down that the hardened grease and make it a lot smoother. But right now I want to inspect the frame. And by doing that, I like to use Purple Power blend, mixed with 50-50 with water. And that way I can give it a good cleaning. I'm not detailing this frame. They didn't pay for that package, which is fine, but I'm doing all the technical portion of it. And also, I definitely, like all bike tune-ups, they definitely want to clean the frame. And I hate to say this, but if you have your bike tuned up and they don't clean the frame, they're really not inspecting the frame. They're just kind of just throwing the parts back on there. So, ooh, this is kind of aerobic. Anyway, so this gives me an opportunity to go over the frame and tube by tube and double check it and clean any extra dirt and grease and grime. For me, it's a level of professionalism. If you get a bike back and it's really just pops and it's amazing, and this one I'm feeling, gunk from sports drinks. Basically sugar water that gets spilt onto the bike, which that's kind of corrosive, you'd think, right? That'd kind of eat up some of the steel parts. Anyhow, I'm definitely getting this guy cleaned up really good. Also, it's more of a wow factor too. You get your bike back and it's like really clean. And I might throw a little polish on this at least once, just to make the paint pop a little bit for the customer, that kind of thing. Also, I want to double check the underneath part, make sure there's no hidden scaries, which I call hidden scaries, because you don't think about looking underneath the bike until you actually start working on it. Then you're like, whoa, what's going on here? So take a minute or two to clean this up. So I am gonna disrupt you volume-wise because I'm gonna run this sonic cleaner. When I ran this before with my other, just the mic on the camera, it kind of made a loud noise, so I do apologize if this does the same. I do need to get this started going. So get that in there, turn on the heating element, it'll warm up as, I can't put the lid on because it sticks up, but here we go. Hopefully it doesn't disrupt you too much. This ultrasonic cleaner is also something that my dog does not like, because he won't hang out with me in the garage because it really messes with his high pitch hearing, or really good hearing. So if it's very disruptive, go ahead and throw something in the comment there and I'll turn it off. But looking at underneath this, this one does have a manufacturer sticker, which is cool, which has the part number, which is kind of irrelevant to most people, but it does have a date that it was manufactured. And the gentleman asked me what year it was, and it says 2009. Well, 2009, obviously, there's 365 days to 2009. So this one was built in June 24th of 2009. So when you're looking at June and July build on a bike, that means it's the next model year, because that's usually when they're releasing the next model year. So even though it was built in 2009, it's actually a 2010, most likely. Well, this is a carryover model, so it could be either or year, which they've done that on some lower end bikes, because what's the point of switching it, giving it model years, when you're just doing the same bike for the same couple of years, which is fine. Actually, it's great because they don't run out of bikes, they just keep building them at a better pace. And I remember in Parker Bikes days, we'd run out of our bread and butter bikes in early June, then we're like high and dry without low-end bikes for July and August, and that's when your busiest season is. It's just, it's really kind of ridiculous. They were like, oh, we got to make it model years. Well, on your $300 bike, it doesn't need a model year. It just needs to be a bike. You can change colors in midstream at any time. It is the same bike with the same parts most of the time. Unless they had a technological upgrade, but it usually was not that huge. So looking at this bike here, it has some dirty spots, but all in all, doesn't look like it has very many bad chips. Pretty good to go there. Also, this one has the frame sticker, which is nice to know because it'll tell you the size of the bike, so you're not in the mystery world of looking up geometries on frames and trying to figure out, is it going to be the one that's going to fit you or not? That kind of thing. So that's a nice thing to have. If you're looking for a used bike, it's nice to have that sticker. If you have a bike that has a sticker on there, leave it on there. It's, keep in mind at some point you'll want to sell that bike, and it's just easier to sell when you have a frame sticker on there. So, and they do look like the kind, you just want to peel it off. Just try not to. It makes it easier for everybody involved. So yeah, I think those housing is good. So I like to put a little bit of lube in the housing, especially the brake, because they don't come pre-lubed. So when I re-thread it, it'll have some fresh grease in there, and I'll aid in for the shifting and so forth. So I think the frame is pretty good. It's set there. So I'm going to be waiting on the parts to clean. It does 5-minute cycles. So Honestly, I do about 3 sets of 5, and that does pretty much get the parts clean. And when I take them I have a shop sink, and in a shop sink, I run hot water, and I'll rinse those parts all off. And I also have a brush in there with some like Dawn soap to kind of scrub any of those stubborn parts off to get those clean, that kind of deal. So I need to find this guy a new tire. What I'm looking for is the size, and I'll say on the side here, it's 700 by 23. You want to match those if you can, so you don't have 2 different sizes in your front and rear wheel. So I'll have to take a peek and see what I got. He didn't seem to be all too worried about having a used tire, and some of these are actually in pretty good shape. Oh, and oh, look at there. The reason why I have so many singles is I replaced a lot of them. A lot of them will have like a worn out rear, but okay front. So I will keep the fronts as a backup. And looky there. It's not the same all condition, but it is a 700 by 23, and the shaping is the same. So that's going to feel good. So this will be a good tire to throw on there. So once my stuff is cooked, I pull out the stuff that I feel like has been cleaned. Typically the chain and the cassette stay in there for a couple rounds, but things like pedals, cage, and brakes usually clean up the first 5 minutes pretty good. So I got the cassette and chain still in there, and the front and rear derailleur and the crankset. So this is where I would like pre-treat it again with my degreaser, and get those parts because they're still a little bit stubborn, and double check my shifters. See if they don't need another washing. And you don't want to do this too much for like the derailleurs and brakes and the shifters, because it will start messing with the finishing. So you want to be careful of that. So on these guys, I'll just now need to rinse off under that hot water. So we're going to work on that in a second here. All right. So I'll put this guy away. Then I will lay out some rags to set my parts on once I rinse them off. And excuse me for 2 seconds, I'm going to go rinse these off real quick. So you can still hear me, so I'm like putting them under, I have like a spray nozzle type shop sink, so it's a light, kind of like rain treatment parts, and run them through the hot water. And if I have several parts, I use those brushes. And it doesn't take long to do. Just need to make sure they get that cleaning solution off of there. Then I shake them really well to help dry them out. And I'm in Colorado, so it's pretty arid here. So I don't have to worry about rusting too much. If you're in an area that's high humidity, yeah, you want to shake these off and take a towel and wash them off. They can air dry and it's not going to rust. So we're good there. Rinse this off real quick. Like so. All righty. There it is. Throw that away. So while I'm waiting for those to cook there, if you have any questions, throw it down in the comments. I'll be more than happy to try to explain Or if you're just hanging out and just want to watch an old guy work on a bike, that's cool too, you know, kind of thing. So I'm going to prep my polishing tray. Like I said, I'm not going to detail this bike, but I do have all these polishing pads. So I'll be just using my white polisher pad for my white polishing, and that'll kind of clean the frame up. I just need one of these. I have 2 of these, probably need to buy 3. Battery life doesn't last too terrible on these guys, so I'll do this afterwards. I don't want to, it's pretty noisy, so I don't want to subject you to that, but if that's bothering you, let me know. But yeah, I'm getting through the parts, and after that, I will clean the wheels. But what can I do? I'm waiting. I can show you how I pre-prep the brakes. I take a little bit of a sandpaper, and on the inside of the pad here, you'll see little lines. Those are your wear indicators. If those are gone, that means the pads need to be replaced. So what I like to do is just, I'm not taking off a lot of material, just kind of evening it out, because the rim will have a not a complete even surface. In addition to, it will kind of take out any kind of contaminants that have been sitting there. So it's pressing into the rim, you know, scraping it. And you'll notice on rims too, the rim surface, like this particular one has like a groove on there. That's a wear indicator groove that they were putting on rims back in the day to show where the rim wear indication is. But what happens is the brake pad will build that lit like a line in here, that kind of thing. The front, oh, let's see, I got a question. Which front ring should my derailleur be trimming on? Well, are you talking about trimming of the shifter, like on the front chain rings? Like on the front chain rings you have a trim set? Well, that depends on the shifter. Like on a triple, you'll have a trim on your small chain ring. I'll go in a little bit to accommodate that range. And definitely in your middle, you'll have a trim back and forth. And also sometimes on the shifter, you'll have a trim on the big ring going down to accommodate for the opposite direction. So when you're looking at that trim, that's what that is. It's kind of hard to get it dead on, but to preset, you really want that front derailleur adjustment to be able to do the full range kind of thing. And to set that, it's like you want to get into the big chain ring, into the small cog in the back and not rub. And then when you go up to the big cog in the back and you tap that trim down, it prevents it from rubbing. And that's I kind of adjust it from the big ring, then double check it on the middle and the small ring. And you're saying you have a 105 10 speed. Is it a triple or a double is the question. And you know, I think on the 105s, only have trimming on one, on the big ring for the double, and not for the small ring. And the concept of thinking like if you're in the smaller ring of the double, you can kind of adjust that range. It's kind of designed to hit that back and forth. But anywho, hopefully that answers your question there. But it can kind of get tricky. I think Park Tools has really good derailleur adjustment videos. I think they do address the double and the triple trimming. But when you're looking at the older stuff, if it's the older 105, I mean a 10-speed 105 is technically a little bit older. I believe there is just the trimming on the top. But you will know when you're hitting that shifter, there'll be like a little half notch. And if you have those, you need to accommodate for that wide spectrum on those. So going back to the brake, I like to put a drop of lube on the pivots and also the barrel adjuster and also the clamp bolt. That way it's caliper is working good and then you can adjust it smoothly, and any kind of, you know, you want these to be tight and secure on that cable so you don't lose any braking power in that perspective. So do the rear and now do the front. And when you're looking at brake pads, most of the brake pads, your rear is going to wear out faster. So keep in mind on that. I mean, some people can alternate them, but they're not that expensive. And you can buy them by a pair. So it's one of those things like you wear out your rear, you just get one pair and just put it on the back. It's not like you buy a set of 4. I mean, you can if you want, but it's one of those deals. All right. So same thing, put a little lube on the pivots here, like so. Nice and smooth. All right, check my parts. So I've done the shifters already twice, so I'm not going to do that a third time. I'm going to check my derailleurs. They look pretty clean. And the crankset. Sometimes with the crankset, you'll need a brush to, make sure you get all that gunk, that Teflon from the chain lubes to get out. This one doesn't have very much buildup, so this is actually pretty good to go. And the chain, since this was a dry drivetrain, it didn't have very much grease on it to take off. So I'm gonna go and disappear in the corner here. I'll keep talking to rinse these guys off, but I'll unplug my sonic cleaner, ultrasonic cleaner. Well, not to drip everything all over the place. I use a tray like a surgeon. So I know you're not seeing this, but as I'm like rinsing these off with the whole basket in there, then I kind of go through each part and rinse them off. And sometimes using like a dish brush to just get any kind of grease or anything off there. But the trick with the shifters, under the hot water rinse, I go through all the gears. And what you're hearing right now, hopefully you're hearing it as a ticking sound. That is I'm going through, I'm cycling through the shifting of the shifters to get all that degreaser out and kind of make sure it's flushed. So I'm not leaving that in there. And I do both the front and the rear. And the derailleurs, I kind of just make sure they're clean and jockey pulleys run smooth. But the rest of the bits just need to be rinsed, as in the chain and the cassette and the crankset. So here I'm back in screen again. I'll show you what I do when I kind of dry these off. This is my basket of bits, right? And this is, my undercarriage cable guide with some bolts and so forth. I just dump those out so they'll dry out. The crank, give it a good kind of toss. Get a good grip so you don't toss this anywhere. You don't want to ding up those chain rings or break anything in your garage. And yeah, try to do any of this stuff in the garage or a workspace outside. You do not want to do this on your carpet, because this will not come out. Even with good, very good steam cleaners, especially if it's a lighter color. I've gotten grease on stuff all over. It tracks into my shoes sometimes. Now I have a really good habit of not wearing, I take my shoes off right at the door. I usually wear slip-ons or flip-flops, so it's just easier just to chuck those and go into the house if I need to grab something. Is I've tracked in, like on the bottom of my shoe, tracked in, grease off the floor and not knowing it. I'm like, oh crap. And you do hear it. Kind of thing. So with the shifters, I like to open them up and I put my finger on these little, where the brake cables go, hold those in place because they'll slide out. And then that way I can make sure those don't pop out as I'm trying to shake out as much water as I can. And I have a cut piece of old housing and I just prop them open like so they can air dry. Little tip and trick there. And with the chain, it's basically, I just wipe it off with a rag. And I have, okay, you're probably noticing I have different color rags. What's that mean? Well, this is your greasy, gunky rag, reds, which is, you'll find in any automotive place. And this is for your parts and the dirty, gritty stuff. We used to have a service that would bring us rags, and they would take the old rags and clean them. So this is your grease rags, and then you'd have a lighter color rag, which I use, you know, I just go into the polishing department of where they have all the polishes for, and Walmart, and they have bundles of these guys, not too terribly expensive. This is just a nice cotton, and that's what I use for polishing and wiping stuff down. And then you get a fiber rags, which you're doing the actual detail polishing with to buff that out. So I have 3 different rags, that is correct. So wipe that off, it looks pretty good. And then you'll have a lot of these cassettes will have one as a bundle. So you want to clean that off. And you want to check on the inside to make sure those got all clean in there. If not, you need to take like a toothbrush or a hard bristle brush to scrape that and put it back in the cleaner. And all these other ones are individuals, so if there's still a little bit of gunk up on there, I can easily just wipe those off as I'm doing it, like so. And all right, so I am working on a 10-speed system, so, but it's a double too, so let's double check and check your 10-speed 105 and see what the click is. I can maybe explain that. So let me dry these off first. And with cassettes, you don't have to worry about too much on the order, for Shimano, that is, and also Surround, because they have a key to them. Campy. Let's just say that's a different world, and please look up those things because they'll have different color spacers between, like these things that go between the cassettes. And there's a couple that are different than the rest, and they go to a specific place on that order. And if you don't have that correct, your shifting's gonna suck. And learn that the hard way. And my goodness, that took me a good hour or two just looking it up and kind of thing. All that. So, all right, let's check out this shifter. So, talking about trim. Trim is that half notch. Nope, not on the rear, it's on the front. It's on your front chainring, so it'll be your left shifter. And so this is a 10-speed. This is the ST6501 model from Shimano. And so if I go up, feels like there's one little half notch, so that'd be the trim for the big chainring, and drops down to the smaller of the 2 rings. What I'm talking about is these guys here. This is your big ring, this is your smaller ring. And the question is there's a half trim to the middle ring too. So, so the question was how do I adjust for the trim? So once I get the cable on the front derailleur, which this is the front derailleur, right? This goes on top. This is what adjusts back and forth. You want the chain to be able to be thrown all the way down and all the way up. So you adjust your cable tension there first. So you want to make sure it goes up. Also, the derailleur cage has 2 screws on top. Those are limit screws. Those prevent the chain from going up and going down too far, so it doesn't throw the chain off either direction. So when you adjust those, so it hits those good, then you play with the trim. And the trim idea is when it's on the outside, all the way out, on the outside cog, which would be the small cog in the back, then you hit this, you get all the way up to the top, then it'll be like this little partial notch. That moves the cage just a little bit, so when those gears go up. So you adjust the cable initially for the big, then you test your trim, and you do that half notch. And if you're in the big cog in the back, so it's cross chaining, and it's not rubbing, it just gives you enough give, that's great. If it's still rubbing, you could use your barrel adjuster on the frame, and just like a quarter of a turn, tighten will loosen, counterintuitive. Tightening is to loosen the cable, enough just to bring that cage down, and do the same for the bottom small one, then you have a cross chain. So when you have the chain on the inside, and you're adjusting that trim, and you're on the small cross chaining again, sometimes that chain will rub against the actual bigger chain ring. It's just how it is. So the trim will work up to maybe that second cog up in the back. So hopefully that adds a little more detail of what you're looking for that trimming. So pre-lube, I don't really do this, only on the shaft here when I put it back on with grease. But let's show you what I do with the derailleurs. And the chain I don't lube until I actually put it on there. But if you're in the world of, I'm gonna try one of those hot waxes, that's something to think about, because when the chain is completely cleaned like this, that's a good time if you want to try one of those molting waxes. I was watching a video yesterday. It was like the Silka one. It was apparently written up in Bicycle Magazine as like one of the better ones. It's like 30, 40 bucks for a bag of this stuff. You put it in like a instant pot, crock pot, or boiling water, whatever, to heat it up. Then you put the chain in there. But it has to start off with a super clean and dry chain. I haven't watched the whole video yet because we're starting to go into, my wife pulled me away, we were going on a date. So, but anyway, apparently he does 2 different cleaning solutions, and then ethanol, or maybe just regular rubbing alcohol. So he had 3 different containers. So when you're using an ultrasonic cleaner, this is the ultimate way, and I didn't realize he did 3 different steps on that for the ultrasonic cleaning. But what you do is you take your chain, you do your sonic cleaning. Then you take this and put it in a baggie, like this. Then you put your straight cleaning solution in there, like Simple Green Direct, just non-diluted. And you put it in the bag, you pour it in there a little bit. You keep that liquid in there, but you can sonic clean this through the bag. Then you kind of do your, shake it a couple times, get it extra, all that grit out, rinse it out, do it again, repeat, and that gets all the gunk out. Then he mentions using rubbing alcohol, and you put rubbing alcohol with the chain in the last one, and do another cycle of it, and that kind of really, really cleans it. Then I would still rinse it off with water, or actually the rubbing alcohol would evaporate. So that would give you the super ultra clean chain. He was putting on brand new chains, which I don't know about that yet, but if it's like a used chain like this, then you can use that Molt hot wax, and there's a couple different brands out there. You can try it out. Apparently, it's some crazy statistics that they last, and they give you drive chain lasts a lot longer. So they're preventing the stretching of the chain and the cassette and so forth. So technically, if it works like they're saying in their studies, their studies go, that would gain the life of your chain cassette. Instead of every like 500 to 1,000 miles you're replacing a chain, you get 2,000 miles out of the chain. And it's always been kind of a rule of thumb, you go through 2 chains to 1 cassette. That even will lengthen that, double that. It sounds like it's double in the life of the chain. And also, he mentioned it adds the life to the chain rings. And these boogers are kind of expensive. So versus the cassette and a chain, those are not too expensive, but these guys can get up there in price. So if you have like an Ultegra or a Dura-Ace and you want to lengthen the life of it. And plus, I've done it on a couple changes, played with it myself a little bit with just beeswax and some regular wax. I was just messing around, and it was quiet. It was like smooth. I mean, it was kind of stealthy quiet. So I might try this particular brand. It has some other chemicals, and it really it goes into the pores of the metal and so forth. It's not something I'm going to cook up in my own kitchen because I got plenty of other things to do. But, if this is something you're doing at home and you're ultrasonic cleaning, that kind of thing. Also check if you're having a bike shop, having your bike tuned up at a bike shop, that'd be an opportune time to have them wax it if they have that as a service. That might be something to check out. So going back to, I'm just going to last final bits here in a couple minutes. I'm about up to an hour. So I'm going to show you what I do when I lube the derailleur. And it's like I do the pivots on both sides. Remember, there's 8 pivots to a derailleur. I do put a coat on the actual spring. What that does is kind of keeps it from rusting. Also, again, I like lubing barrel adjusters and binding bolts that way. It's all nice and smooth, and I kind of massage that grease or oil into the jockey pulleys. Even though they say they're sealed and all that kind of thing, there's still a wear point in there, and you want that area. The derailleur too has several pivot sides, and I do the binder bolt, and also I like coating on the spring. Since I'm using that Superior lube, it doesn't really attract that much dirt, and I like to cycle it a little bit, kind of there. That's my front derailleur. And also for clipless pedals, it's always good to put a little bit of grease on the spring on there. You don't really have to do the contact points where the cleat goes in. I've noticed the springs rust on these quite a bit because the polish or whatever gets flaked off at some point. It's just going to give you a better performance. It's not going to cause anything to bind up. And last but not least, here's the trick for the shifters. When you ultrasonic clean shifters, so you see in here, there's like a whole little mechanism in there. It's like a little watch. And what I found is TriFlow makes a foam loop, and kind of kick it in there like so. And as you're cycling the shifting, that foam kind of gets in and works in all those areas. So it's not like glue that just drops right through. It kind of sits there and works, bakes itself in. So the grease that they put in there is kind of like a Teflon regular grease, right? And it sits in there and works great after a while, but this stuff hardens up after a certain amount of time. So that's what's causing that pull not to catch. It's binding that up on a lot of those older shifters. So if you cycle that through, I can tell you right now, that feels a lot smoother. And also with the shifters, you want to check, and I found, I'm using my hand on both of them. So if it's mounted, you got your up, then you got to hold this individually to push, because you hold this, sometimes I've had some broken shifters in there where, so you want to, that's where I'm double checking before I put it back on there. So that seems to be working just fine, like so. Then I proceed to the other shifter, front and rear alike. You'll see this little, exposed mechanism. So when these first came out, here's a little story. The 90s story of the STI shifters when they first came out. The people were not used to shifters on their brake levers, right? And they lay their bikes down. Because road bikes don't put kickstands, so they lay them down. Well, they weren't very mindful of where they were laying them down, because back in the day, the shifters were down here on the down tube, so they didn't really have to think about it. So you got a shifter that has a mechanism like this going onto the side of the road where there's dirt. So when you got sand and dirt in here, holy cow, it just, it was a mess. So you'd have to take the whole thing apart, clean it all out. And back then, we didn't have ultrasonic cleaners. It was your standard solvent tanks, which are nice and gooky. So force that in there. So yeah, it was one of those first day of the lake type of situations where you're like, oh, you want to make sure that doesn't dive into that little pile of finite sand on the side of the road. So yeah, had to clean a few of those out, kind of thing. I'm like, yeah. Those shifters are kind of interesting. The down, they're the same as on the tri-bikes. They have like those shifters that go up top when they're down shifters back in the day, and they had bolts that hold them in place. And if those loosened up, you'd shift up and it'd slide back down. And one customer once, he's like, I can't get this to stay in a gear, and all you had to do is take a quarter turn to the screw and to lock it into place. And he's like, oh, that was it, Hours of frustration on a ride, and all it was a quarter of a turn of a screw that would have fixed it. So anyhow. All right, so the parts are all lubed up and ready to go onto the frame. So I'm going to leave you now, but I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to wash the wheels in the tub I have over there, and then I'll put them in the truing stand, and I polish them off, and also true the wheels, and also double check everything. And then once those are all true, I'll put the new tire on there and tube. And then I'll do a quick polish on the frame here, just give it a nice little shine to it. Then after that, then the parts just basically go on as a reverse order, in the sense that you put the shifters on through the cables, get all your cranks and derailleurs and brakes on there. I have several videos of this you can watch, how I do it. And then you do a finite adjustments, and then you're good to go. So this is about, I would say, about halfway through the process, and you watch me do it, and it's about an hour. Well, about a third of the process, but my detailing goes a little more lengthy sometimes. Sometimes I'll take about an hour just on detailing the frame, just trying to get those scratches out and all that kind of thing. So that's an added benefit there. But putting it back together takes about the same amount of time, so 2 hours. 2.5 is a good full tune-up kind of thing when you're pretty experienced, if you don't come across any issues. So that's one of those things that's, it's kind of cool. So when you're looking at shop rate hours in bike shops, and you're assuming they're going to be on the bike for at least 2.5 to 3 hours, that kind of thing, then there's like office time, which you're writing up the ticket and all that kind of thing, and test riding and all that. So yeah, make sure make sure those mechanics test drive the bike, and also test drive the bike yourself when you're done picking it up. So, hey, thanks for hanging out with me on a Saturday afternoon. If you're a father and it's Father's Day tomorrow in your neck of the woods, happy Father's Day. I have more videos coming. They're all just kind of trickling in. I'll try to do one every day or every other day, so I'll give you some insights there. And thank you for spending time with me. And hey, have a great day. Get on the bike and ride if it's nice in your neighborhood. It's summer, right? Get out there. Have fun. Thanks. Take care.